Hello, church family. Hope you're doing well. You're probably starting to wonder if I'm like not growing or not going to shave until maybe the pandemic is over. And I wanted you to know that you are correct in that. I'm also not showering because, what's the point? You know what I'm saying? So I'm doing that for us. I'm going on strike, until this pandemic is over. I'm not doing that. Okay, that's not true. But anyway, let's jump right into it. I asked the question: why is it that the church oftentimes, or a lot of people in the church, don't really view children as a blessing, or don't really seem to view children as a blessing? And I would just say that my two cents are this: I think it's because of the age and the culture we live in. What's valued very, very highly today in our culture: freedom and comfort. I would say are two things that are valued hugely. And I think that, we recognize that bearing and raising children is oftentimes very uncomfortable and limits your personal freedom. It takes away your free time, your me time. Let's just be honest. But I think when you think that and you just stop there, oh, so maybe I shouldn't have kids. Maybe I don't really want kids. Maybe kids aren't really that much of a blessing. I think we're short-sighted, because I think that later on in life, they will extend your freedoms. As you get older, they will. Children typically will help their parents and care for them, and along the way throughout the years, they will bring much comfort. So, children are most certainly a blessing, not the only blessing from God by any means, but a blessing. All right, let's see. Psalm chapter 4. Interesting little psalm. This is a psalm of David. And there's an initial prayer that David addresses to God. And then in verse 2, there's like this switch where David is now addressing those that are frustrating him, those that are essentially his enemies. And he's addressing them. He says, "How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods?" And we haven't really talked about idols yet this month. But there's a lot in Psalms and Proverbs about idols. And I have this really great quote about what an idol is that I wanted to share with you. It says, "It is anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give anything you seek to give you what only God can give." And that's from Tim Keller. And I think that's so right on. So we need to be careful when it comes to that. And then in verse 6, there's this switch back to addressing God. And so I think that it's really, really good what David is doing here. It's this prayer, God, help me, give me relief. And then this addressing to these enemies: hey, get it together, stop it. And then verse 6, again, addressing God: help me, God, fill my heart with joy even in the midst of this. Give me peace when I lay down. Because ultimately, we can try to change our situation, try to deal with our enemies, but we can't change them. But God, in the midst of it, can still give us peace. He can still walk us through it and make sure that we are able to sleep at night and to dwell safely, as it says there. So good stuff there. Thank you, David. And then Proverbs chapter 24 is where we're at. And I wanted to point out a couple things here. First off, in verse 17, it says, "Do not gloat when your enemy falls. When they stumble, do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from them." And I think that the indication here is that not only will the Lord turn his wrath away from them, but his wrath will be turned towards you. If you are gloating over the demise of your enemy, it seems to indicate that God will be frustrated by that. And instead of you having mercy on your enemies, and now what we're supposed to do, what Jesus called us to do, love our enemies and pray for them, instead we're gloating over them. God is not going to look kindly on that, and we will possibly have to deal with his wrath. So we need to deal with that so that when those things happen, we're ready and we're caring for our enemy and not happy that they are struggling and suffering. Verse 21, "Fear the Lord and the King, my son, and do not join with rebellious officials." It's interesting. Last night I read this in the NASB, and it said, the verse was actually, My son, fear the Lord and the king. Do not associate with those who are given to change. But the NIV is a lot different. So I looked up various definitions or various translations, and most of them say the same thing as the NASB, which is to not associate with those who are given to change. And the word there in the Hebrew is shana or shana, Shana, which is a good friend of mine who is a part of the church now, recently moved here from Southern California, spelled the same way, shana. And this idea of given to change, and I started to think, isn't that interesting? Those who are given to change don't have a truth foundation where their lives are built on this truth foundation, and so everything is filtered through that. And even in the political world, it's okay, let's make sure that everything we're doing comes back to this truth foundation. And so I would just say that we need to be careful as Christians to not be too progressive and wanting things to be changing and changing and changing, and not remembering, okay, it's got to be built upon God's word. If it doesn't mesh with God's word, then it shouldn't change. If it needs to mesh more with God's word, then it does need to change. But just a word of caution there when it comes to being too progressive or changing too much. All right, my question that I want to leave you with is, what would you say are the most common idols that Christians need to destroy? We talked about idols just a moment ago. What would you say are the most common idols Christians need to destroy in their lives? God bless you. Thanks for joining me.